Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Ernst Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. We've all seen the results. Every single conference championship game is over and done with, and now all the talk is shifted to the college football playoff and who the committee is going to end up putting into the playoff. We've seen some crazy results that have made this race more interesting than it would have been if the results had gone a different way. If Georgia had knocked off Alabama, then the Crimson Tide, they would have been eliminated, and Georgia obviously would have been the number one seed. But Alabama beat Georgia, so that's made things interesting. Florida State obviously beat Louisville as well. That was big for them because of the fact that they're able to presumably be in the college football playoff, even though some people are questioning it because of the fact that the Seminoles are not as good of a football team without Jordan Travis. But an undefeated Power 5 champion, they have to be in the playoff. Texas blew out Oklahoma State. They've got the head-to-head over Bama. That looks really good as well. Washington beat Oregon, so that eliminated the Ducks. But everybody's asking the same question. Who is the committee going to put in for the final spot in the college football playoff? Because we know that the Michigan Wolverines, the Washington Huskies, and the Florida State Seminoles are going to be in the college football playoff. Again, people are debating Florida State, but it should not be a debate. Is Florida State one of the four best teams in college football without Jordan Travis? No. Was Florida State one of the four best teams with Jordan Travis? Probably not as well, but the Seminoles being undefeated, winning the ACC, the committee has to put them in. They've never left out an undefeated Power 5 conference champion before, and they're not going to do it now. The Seminoles have earned their right in the college football playoff, even if they get blown out by whoever they play. And like I said, Washington and Michigan, they've punched their ticket as well. So it's coming down to three teams, four if you want to get really interesting about it, but it's down to the Alabama Crimson Tide, the Texas Longhorns, the Georgia Bulldogs, and the Ohio State Buckeyes still have an argument as well. But most people are centering this around Alabama and Texas. And the reason why, because the Alabama Crimson Tide are the first team to knock off the Georgia Bulldogs in 29 games, and Alabama was the last team to knock off the Georgia Bulldogs as well back in 2021 in the SEC championship game. So Alabama, they have Georgia's number, and this win gives the Crimson Tide a legitimate argument to make the college football playoff because Alabama has the best win of anybody in college football. Texas's win at Alabama in week 2 of the season. That was a very impressive win because nobody has beaten Alabama in Bryant-Denny Stadium since Joe Burrow's LSU team knocked off Alabama. But I just don't see how you can leave an SEC champion with one loss, especially being Alabama, out of the playoff. But if any team is going to have an argument to be ahead of Alabama, I believe it is the Texas Longhorns because they have the head-to-head win over the Alabama Crimson Tide, and that should be taken into account. Texas deserves to have that recognized by the committee that they knocked off the Crimson Tide, even though it was so long ago. Alabama is a much better football team now than they were then, even though they barely beat the Auburn Tigers. I understand that Alabama struggled with Auburn, a 6-win team, but it was in a rivalry game, and Alabama survived. A win is a win, and teams don't always play up and down to their expectation level. If Alabama played the way that they did against Auburn in this Georgia game, they would have got destroyed. If Auburn played the way they did against Alabama, against New Mexico State, they beat them. So that's not how it works. Teams don't always play as well as they should. Texas barely beat TCU this year. Texas barely beat the Kansas State Wildcats as well. And plus, they struggle with Houston and Iowa State. So the Longhorns haven't been perfect either. And they also have the worst loss of the two. Texas lost to Oklahoma, which is a 2-loss team, where Alabama's only loss is to Texas, and Georgia's loss is to Alabama. You talk about Georgia being the number 1 team. Normally, in most years, if Georgia lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game, they would be in, because how many times has Alabama in the past lost one game, and whether they were an SEC champion or not, they made the college football playoff? Normally, a team in the SEC with one loss, especially if they are in the SEC championship game, they're in the playoff. Georgia's made it before with that one loss in the conference championship game. But this year, there are so many teams that can qualify for the college football playoff because of the amount of teams that either are undefeated or have one loss. Teams like Florida State and Washington, they're not normally in the mix. This is what makes this year so special. And you're not going to have all this when you have a 12-team playoff. All this intrigue, all the questions of who should be in and who should not be in. Yeah, you're going to be determining between teams ranked like 12, 13, and 14 who should be in, but it's not as fun as it is right now. This last season of college football, where it's a 14 playoff, it's been fantastic, and all of this intrigue, all the questions, it makes it so much more fun, and the debate is awesome. And I'm really debating it as well, because in my opinion, I will say, I believe Alabama should be in the college football playoff. They knocked off the number 1 team. They have the best win in college football, and even though, yes, they lost lost to Texas, which is the team that they're competing with to try to make the playoff, I believe Alabama overall has a better case to make the playoff based on a lot of different reasons. I understand that some people would point to strength of schedule and some people would point to resume, because Ohio State, if you go off resume, the Buckeyes have a solid resume. Some people would say that they should be in, but they're not a conference champion. They didn't even get to the conference championship game because they lost to Michigan. Georgia, they do not have an argument there either because they lost the conference championship to Alabama. And like I said, in most years, Georgia would not fall from number 1 to out of the playoff. But again, like I said a minute ago, there are so many teams that did better than most people would have thought, like Florida State and Washington, that are in, that Georgia is not automatically in just because they have one loss. And I believe Georgia should be below Alabama because Alabama beat them. And I know people are going to say, if I say that Georgia should be below Alabama because of head-to-head in the loss, but Texas should not be ahead of Alabama even though they have the head-to-head. It's not the exact same thing because Alabama just beat Georgia. Texas beat Alabama a long time ago, and plus that Alabama ended up getting a better win than Texas has on the resume, which I know sounds like I'm devaluing Alabama, saying that that's not as good of a win, but Alabama beating Georgia now shows you that that win should matter a lot more because it just happened versus Texas beating Alabama back in week 2 of the season. It should count, but I don't think that it should be held to the same standard. And I know that Texas just blew out Oklahoma State. That was a really good win, but if you look at Texas in the Big 12, that's not as tough of a conference as the SEC. Texas playing Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game, that's not as tough of a game. You look at last year, TCU made the college football playoff. Yes, they deserved to get in because they only had one loss, and the Alabama Crimson Tide had 2 losses, but TCU lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game, but then Alabama blew out Kansas State in the bowl game. So Alabama on paper is better than every single team in the Big 12, even though they did not beat Texas. The head-to-head should matter. All I will say is if the College Football Playoff Committee puts the Texas Longhorns into the playoff because of the head-to-head, and that's their main reasoning for it, I understand it. I won't be upset about it because Texas deserves to get in. In a way, even though I'm glad for Florida State that they made the playoff, and they do deserve to make the playoff despite the circumstances, and they're clearly not one of the 4 best teams right now with Jordan Travis, and even with them that was questionable. Both these teams deserve to get in, and a lot of people are rooting for Florida State to lose because Alabama and Texas deserve to get in. Georgia deserves to get in as well to an extent because they're a really good team. If you look at the poll I put out on Twitter, who should be the 4th team in the college football playoff, 57% of people are saying Texas, 38% of people are saying Alabama. You just can't really put the Georgia Bulldogs in, even though they are a one-loss SEC team, which in most years that would be good enough to get in. But with that loss to Alabama and the fact that Florida State, Washington, and the Michigan Wolverines are all getting into the college football playoff, Alabama has the head-to-head over them. They can't make the playoff, and the poll recognizes it. Even though Ohio State's resume is good, no one's voting for them. It's going to come down to Texas and Alabama, as everybody in the poll agrees with as well. But like I said, in my opinion, I believe that Alabama should get in, even though the head-to-head should matter. I'm not saying it doesn't. And if Texas gets in, it's well-deserved. I think Texas and Alabama should both be in, but you have to put Florida State in. But the Alabama Crimson Tide have the best win in college football over the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC championship game, while the Texas Longhorns' best win is over Alabama in week 2 of the season. Both have a great argument. I would personally go with Alabama, but it's going to be interesting to see what the College Football Playoff Committee does decide to do, whether they put the Alabama Crimson Tide or the Texas Longhorns in, or even possibly the Georgia Bulldogs or the Ohio State Buckeyes. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, who you think should be in the College Football Playoff in the number 4 slot, whether you believe that the Alabama Crimson Tide or the Texas Longhorns deserve to be in, if you are a believer in the head-to-head or in the fact that Alabama got the better win, or if there's some other team that you believe should be in that number 4 spot. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.